If you were asked to define diversity, equity, and inclusion, could you do that? The state of Idaho cannot. Nowhere in state code is DEI defined to know what it includes and what it doesn't. They tried to do it last session, but that bill, another one put forth by Nampa Senator Brian Lenny, never made it out of committee. Yet for the past several years, they've had contentious and oftentimes misguided debates on the topic of DEI in legislative chambers, specifically when it comes to DEI programs or groups on Idaho's public college campuses. Here's just a sample of that from the Senate floor when they were debating the higher education budget in 2023.
Because funding racism, hate, political litmus tests, and indoctrination of not just students but also faculty is not an Idaho value.
DEI, equity, inclusion, belonging, various terms.
Diversity, equity, or not diversity, what's called diversity, equality, and whatever they're calling it nowadays.
We're funding this DEI litmus test.
And so apparently the universities are paying for positions that relate to people's sexual choices.
They tell minorities and women, you're not good enough to make it on your own standards. You're not good enough to make it on your own merit.
Things that are mandatory for them to take that they feel is along the lines of wokeism and indoctrination.
More than a dozen positions devoted to these ideologies.
Inclusivity, but seems to pick who they're inclusive with while villainizing everybody else.
I can't remember how many diversity, equity, and inclusion courses in my day at the state level, local level, federal level, and not one of those courses ever changed my mind about anything.
You don't have to tell us that, Senator Foreman. Well, needless to say, there wasn't a firm grasp on just what diversity, equity, inclusion programs are, what they do, or how they are funded, or why they're an important part of the university experience. By the way, the budget, which did pass, but with a lot of nays, did include a section that banned state funds from being used for anything related to DEI in Idaho colleges and universities. Those budgets have come under specific scrutiny the past several years over DEI, which is probably why the State Board of Education brought forth 3 resolutions today in a special meeting in Boise, the first of which deals directly with diversity, equity, and inclusion and its presence on college campuses.
These resolutions are not, and I want to make this kind of very clear, they're not about addressing one particular body of students or our populations. They're really about trying to set the expectation that we are holistically looking at students as a whole body and how we move those students towards successful outcomes.
So here's the resolution in simplest terms. Basically, it says Idaho schools of higher education will maintain equal opportunity, regardless of identity. There'll be no DEI-related offices, policies, or initiatives. Any success center will be open to all students, and no employee or student will have to declare gender or pronouns on campus. It sounds pretty simple, right? And while this was just discussed in today's meeting and no decision was made on the resolution, we still wanted to know what the schools might think of this, the ones at the center of this so-called controversy. However, the University of Idaho, Idaho State University, and Boise State University all refused to speak with us about it. So to get to the bottom of what DEI actually means and why it's an important part of college, we had to ask a private school. Latonia Haney-Keith is a Harvard-educated attorney and an educator. She sits on the executive leadership team of the College of Idaho. She says to think of DEI as maybe you walk into a crowded room where you know nobody, but you're in the minority. And that could be because of gender, sexual orientation, economic status, or even race.
If you're a freshman coming to a college campus for the very first time, if you identify with the majority that you see, and our brains do this immediately right when we walk into a room, you automatically have a baseline sense of welcoming and belonging. And from my perspective, our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that are happening on college campuses first make sure that all those students have that same baseline welcoming, feeling, and belonging, and then lifts up all students to make sure they all have that enhanced sense of belonging, connection to that college or university, and that they all have opportunity to pursue academic achievement.
That is something Latonia believes is summed up in the resolution's third whereas. Colleges are required to create a welcoming and dynamic learning environment of belonging.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think what I disagree with is that diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are antithetical to that mission. As an educator, creating a sense of belonging and furthering the academic achievements of all students is our daily purpose. And so my question really is exactly yours, in the sense of, what are we really trying to accomplish here? What is the problem that we're trying to solve?
So, big picture,
Yeah.
What do you think of these resolutions the State Board of Education is considering?
Yeah, I would say that I'm concerned. I have several concerns. One, I worry that there is a misunderstanding as to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on campus, that there's a reflection of that in the way this resolution is written.
Like a confusion of what it is? Mm-hmm. In what way?
Just in terms of the type of initiatives that are happening on campus, that it's in some ways an articulation that the kind of distribution of rights in our country, meaning that we have a pie, and if I provide support students services to a student, that means I must be doing it to the detriment of another student. That worldview, that this is a zero-sum game, that it's a pie, is just a really challenging worldview that I don't believe is what's really happening on our college campuses.
As an attorney, what do you think of them?
Well, as an attorney, in my mind, words matter. I am concerned about that there's a lack of clarity in those resolutions, both in terms of what are we really trying to achieve with the resolutions, and what do we mean when we say the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, the definitions around some of those, that terminology.
Latonia points to the part in the resolution that says institutions shall ensure no central office, policy, procedure, or initiative is dedicated to DEI, except for a slew of exceptions, like with athletics, accreditation, academic research or instruction, eligibility for federal grants, or scholarships.
And so my concern really is, how will we determine whether or not a particular office or initiative falls within the concern that's articulated at the beginning of the first resolution, which is a mandate not to focus on DEI. And that lack of clarity and that threat of enforcement, I think, has a possibility of a chilling effect among institutions that I think that will lead to a detrimental effect for all students across the board.
Can schools just change names of things? Call them something else?
Yeah, well, that, again, I'll put my lawyer hat on for that. I mean, then what's the purpose of that? That's, I think, why I go back to the question of what are we really trying to achieve here? What is truly the problem that we're trying to solve? Because if all this really means is change the name of an office, change the name of a group, change the title of a particular person, then what problem are we really trying to solve here? And I think, again, that palms open approach, in my opinion, of us coming to the table to say, if there really is a problem, let's solve that, as opposed to let's take an approach such as these resolutions, because I don't think at the end of the day it's going to solve the problem, because we've not really even articulated truly what that problem is.
Well, as you heard, Idaho lawmakers debated. They're not even sure how to say it, much less define it or explain why it's a problem, specifically with specific issues. Right now, it's not even an official resolution, of course, but if the State Board of Education decides to pass it over the next several weeks, will it matter? Does a resolution hold any water? After all, it just says a lot of stuff schools shall or shall not do. Latonia Haney-Keith told us, well, it all comes down to enforcement and a show of support from those appointed and elected educational leaders. For the board to have the backs of the schools to focus on their true mission, which is to educate all students.